Okay, moving on to the final segment of today's show. I'm finally going to be unveiling my preseason, pre-draft top 25 to you guys for the college basketball season. And I know there are plenty of analysts who like to release this a little later than I do, maybe even a little earlier than I do, like right after the season ended. But I did spend some time really studying each team, really projecting each team's roster. And after a bunch of research, after a couple weeks, I've completed my preseason top 25. And I'm going to count down from 25 to 1 who I think should be the preseason top 25 right now. If you guys have any arguments, feel free to hit me up. You guys know the social media. Instagram, ZAC_KRULL. Twitter at ZKRULL3. And YouTube at ZACKRULL. All three segments of today's show will be posted to the YouTube channel. So without further ado, here we go. Starting off, the team I have finishing in 25th spot in the preseason. That would be from the Big East, Kevin Willard and his Seton Hall Pirates. And on paper, I totally understand this team did lose a decent amount from last year's squad. Miles Powell, Romaro Gill, Quincy McKnight were three players that were really important and guys that all made big-time impacts. But Kevin Willard, over the last couple years, has done a really nice job, I think, of proving that he's a consistent coach that really, as long as you give him a decent roster, he could do things with it. And I think when I look at this Pirate roster, they have that. At point guard, they're going to be starting Bryce Aiken, the grad transfer from Harvard. They have another transfer in the backcourt to Kyle Molson, a kid that could really score. And then the 3, 4, 5 positions are what I really like for the Seton Hall team. Miles Kale, Jared Roden, and Sandro Mamukalishvili. I think Mamu is one of the more underrated players in all of college basketball. I think he has an opportunity to be the best player for Seton Hall. I think Roden has a lot of upside. And if Miles Kale during his senior year, right, if he could just be consistent and, maybe take a little bit of a jump like Miles Powell did during his upperclassman years, I think the Seton Hall team could be pretty good. They have three guys off the bench that all played, significant minutes last year. Shavar Reynolds, Tyrese Samuel, and Ike Obiagu. I have Seton Hall at 25. Moving on to team number 24, we will head to the Big Ten, and this is a team that I kind of feel bad for because this is a team that would have made the NCAA tournament for the first time in a while last year if we would have had an NCAA tournament. Unfortunately, it didn't, but the team I have slotted in at number 24 is Rutgers, and Steve Peichel did such a good job with this squad last year. They bring back mostly everyone. They do lose a couple guys, including Akwase Yaboa, the grad transfer from Stony Brook, who was really good down the stretch last year, but they do bring back basically everyone else. Geo Baker going to be starting at point guard. Montez Mathis and Ron Harper, two young guards. Harper's an excellent player. I think he long-term will be the best player on this Rutgers team. And then they have a front court of Miles Johnson and Chris Omoruyi. Omoruyi, a top 50 recruit this year, one of the better recruits Rutgers has gotten in recent history. And kind of similar to Seton Hall, they have depth off the bench. Jacob Young, Caleb McConnell, and Paul Mulcahy, three guys that all played significant minutes last year. And that 8-man rotation of Baker, Mathis, Harper, Johnson, Omoruyi, and then Young, McConnell, and Mulcahy off the bench is looking pretty good for Rutgers, who the thing I like about Rutgers is they really used their home court to their advantage last year, winning so many big games. And when you did that, especially in last year's Big Ten, that was the perfect formula to put you into the NCAA tournament. I have Rutgers behind Baker and Harper at 24. Coming in at number 23, we will head to the Atlantic 10, and I'm going to take Richmond. Richmond was a team that was on the bubble basically throughout this whole season, and I think if the tournament would have occurred, they would have gotten in. But the main reason why I like Richmond going into next season is that they bring everyone back, including their big three, which is really good. Point guard Jacob Gilliard, a little fast guard that could really move around and dribble effectively. Blake Francis and Grant Golden are their other two big-time players. Francis was really good down the stretch last year. Golden is really their most versatile player. They have a good rebounder in Nathan Kayo, and Chris Mooney's been under a little bit of pressure over the last couple of years at Richmond, and this is probably going to be his best opportunity in a while to win games and get to an NCAA tournament. It probably would have happened this year if the tournament didn't get canceled. I totally understand that, but still, it's not like Richmond could do anything else. If I'm Richmond, I don't want this season for me turning into what happened at VCU last year when going into the season, expectations were everywhere, and unfortunately, they just couldn't come through. I have Richmond at number 23. At number 22, let's go to the Big 12 for the first time. And this is a team that I usually have trouble ranking in my top 25 in the preseason because I can never trust them. But when you look at the talent on this team, I just think it's undeniable, and that's Texas. Texas is returning basically everyone that played any minute last year, along with bringing in Greg Brown, the former top 10 recruit. And I think when you look at this Texas Longhorn team under Shaka Smart, we've spoken a bunch about these guys on this podcast before. All the pressure in the world is on Shaka Smart heading into this season. He brings everyone back. And it's going to be interesting to see what exactly his rotations is, because this roster is just loaded with former top 100 recruits. When you look at their projected starting five, Matt Coleman, senior point guard. Courtney Ramey, upperclassman guard. Jace Febris, upperclassman guard. Then you have Greg Brown, the freshman, and Jericho Sims. It's interesting that Texas last year played better when Jericho Sims was out of the lineup and when Kai Jones and Donovan Williams, guys like that, were in the lineup. So I'm going to be curious to see, does Shaka go with Jericho Sims and Jace Febris in the starting lineup? Because last year, when those guys were taken out, that's when Texas was playing at their best. And the interesting thing about Texas is they have so many different options that they could use off the bench. Kai Jones, who played really well down the stretch last year. Andrew Jones, dynamic scoring guard. Gerald Liddell, former top 100 recruit. Donovan Williams, who played really well down the stretch last year. They also have Kamika Hepa, Royce Ham, and Brock Cunningham, all who played meaningful minutes last year. So the pressure is on Shaka Smart to figure out his rotation. I'm curious to see what exactly Greg Brown does, because a lot of times when you add a freshman that's really good to a group that has played all together before, and Greg Brown obviously has not, that's always an interesting thing to monitor. But the pressure's on Texas, man. If Shaka Smart does not make the NCAA tournament this season with this group, he will be getting fired. And I literally could not tell you one coach that enters this season under more pressure than Shaka Smart and the Texas Longhorns. He clearly has the talent to do it, but since Shaka Smart has arrived in Austin, talent has never been the issue. It's always been, can he push the right buttons in order to be to lead a winning team? And he's coached NBA guys, so talent has once again never been an issue, but he has to really put it together and at the least make the NCAA tournament. And I think Texas should be a top 25 team, at least talent-wise. And let's see what they do on the court in 2021. Let's go to the SEC, and I will now go to number 21, and that is Alabama. And the thing with Alabama is right now they still don't know what exactly their roster is going to be looking like next season, as both John Petty and Herbert Jones are on the fence about the NBA draft. But right now, I'm going to assume that both those guys come back. I think Petty is more of a realistic option to leave than Herbert Jones. It is also worth mentioning that Alabama actually already lost one member of their team early to the NBA draft, and that is Kyra Lewis. But Lewis, you see, is kind of a guy where they kind of expected that he was going to be gone for a while. He was an NBA draft candidate last year. So I have Alabama from the SEC at 21, and their projected starting five right now is looking pretty interesting. They're going to be starting Javon Quinterly, the Villanova transfer, at point guard. Quinterly is a former big-time top 30 recruit. He went to Villanova. It didn't really work out too well. I like that they're going to pair him with Jaden Shackelford, another former top 100 recruit that was awesome down the stretch last year, and you pair that with John Petty, assuming he comes back. I really like that top three for Alabama. Herbert Jones, a good defender. Alex Reese, James Rojas, other versatile forwards. Jawan Gary is healthy. Josh Primo, the top 50 freshman. Javen Davis that could rebound. I think Alabama has a really solid 9-man rotation, assuming Nate Oates could figure it out. I love the Tide. I have them at number 21. At number 20, we'll go to the ACC. I have Louisville, and obviously Louisville, it was tough for them to lose Jay Scruggs. I totally understand that, but they do a nice job reloading, bringing in Carleek Jones, the grad transfer from Radford, pairing him with David Johnson and Samuel Williamson in the backcourt. I think if Louisville, even though they lost a lot, if they're going to be any good this season, they're going to need those three guys, Johnson, Jones, and Williamson, to be the reason why they're good. Unfortunately, it did take a little bit of time towards the back end of last season for David Johnson to really develop and show us his potential, and Samuel Williamson, unfortunately, just really wasn't able to do that. So they're going to need for those guys to play well. They also lose Sutton in the front court, which could be a big loss. They're going to need Aiden Nagahan. He's going to be a sophomore this season to step up. They also bring in Charles Minland to the transfer from San Francisco, along with Malik Williams, senior big man in that front court. So Louisville, I think they're going to need to find their star, but I think both David Johnson and Sam Williamson could be that guy. I have the Cardinals at number 20. Moving on to the team I have at number 19, we will head to the American Athletic Conference, and I'm going to take the Houston Cougars and Kelvin Sampson. And the thing that stands out to me for this Houston team is this is actually going to be the second year in a row where they lose one of their key pieces in the preseason due to an early entry to the NBA draft. Last year, it was Armani Brooks. If he would have came back, I think Houston could have been a top 10 team in the preseason. Unfortunately, he leaves. And then this year, as a matter of fact, just yesterday, Nate Hinton, the guard, announces that he will be leaving school early. And I still think Houston's going to be pretty solid. They have a nice core of Caleb Mills and Quentin Grimes and Marcus Sasser in the backcourt. All three of those guys were awesome down the stretch. And right now, DeJon Jarreau is kind of 50-50 on the NBA. But if he comes back, you pair him along with Fabian White in the front court. I think that makes out for a really good and balanced starting five. And under Kelvin Sampson over the last couple seasons, Houston has done a really nice job, just turning themselves into a consistent winner. And I really like this Cougar team. The American is going to be a little tough. I think Memphis is going to be much improved playing together for another season. Obviously, Temple is always a team that's in the mix. UConn, remember, is no longer in the league anymore. But Wichita State is going to be curious also to see how they look after their big exodus. But I think Houston and their core of Mills, Grimes, Jarreau, and White should be pretty solid. I have them at number 19. Okay, moving on to the team I have at 18, and this is going to be a surprise to some people, but we will head to the Big 12, and this is actually going to be probably the lowest I've ever had Kansas ranked in the preseason. And I know a lot of people are going to call me crazy for having Kansas ranked 18th in the preseason poll. That is, a lot of people are going to think that it's way too high. Way too low. But at the same time, last year, the thing with Kansas was this, and the reason why I didn't love Kansas, and they were very good, don't get me wrong, but the reason why I didn't love Kansas as much as everyone else did is because when I watched their team, I only saw really two ways that they could score the ball: Devon Dotson and Udoka Azubuike. And guess what? Both of those guys are no longer here. So right now, if I'm Bill Self, I'm putting out a starting lineup of Marcus Garrett at the one, and that's the first problem. Devon Dotson has been Kansas's starting point guard basically every game for the last 2 seasons. Marcus Garrett has never played a minute of point guard in his life. And I'm not saying he's not a good player. He is probably the best defensive player in the country. And he will have no problem guarding other teams' point guards. The problem is he a good enough playmaker to lead the offense and create opportunities? They also bring in Bryce Thompson, the top 30 freshman. Christian Braun, a guy that actually was pretty good down the stretch for them last year. Ochai Agbaji is the big one for me, man. I think they need him to really break out if they want to be good. And David McCormick should be starting center. Tristan Enaruna, Tyon Grant Foster, Silvio D'Souza, and Jalen Wilson also round out the bench for Kansas. And once again, I think this team is a tournament team. I think Bill Self is a very good coach. I have them ranked at 18, but I just got to be honest with you. I don't see the talent on this team as a top 10 team. When Kansas has a team like that, I have no problem putting them there. I always love the teams with Devon Dotson and Devontae Graham and Udoka Azubuike and even Quentin Grimes. Those teams were super talented, and Dedrick Lawson. But right now, I'm not putting this Kansas team any higher until I see a big-time go-to scorer really develop. And it's not Marcus Garrett, who's very good. But once again, his strength is defense, not offense. And Ochai Agbaji, high-key, was a little bit disappointing last year. I need to see more from him. I have Kansas at 18. Okay, moving on to the team I have at number 17, we will head to the Big Ten, and I'm going to take the Michigan State Spartans to finish at number 17. And this is right now assuming that Xavier Tillman is leaving. And right now, Xavier Tillman is 50-50 on if he's going to go to the NBA or not. And in this top 25 projection, I'm just doing it based on what I think is going to happen. And Xavier Tillman is a guy that's been in school for a while, even though he does have one more year of eligibility left. He also has 2 kids. I think it may just be time for him to make that money. So I'm going to assume that Xavier Tillman is gone. That would also mean Michigan State loses Cassius Winston. But I will say this. I do like their core. They would right now start A.J. Hoggart, the freshman point guard. Obviously, having a freshman point guard is a big concern, but I think if you surround him with Rocket Watts, a guy that really stepped up his game towards the back end of last season, I'm a big fan of his, along with Aaron Henry right now, 50-50 on the NBA, but I think he's coming back. Malik Hall, a kid that showed some flashes towards the back end of last season, played awesome in the game against Seton Hall, and Joey Hauser, the transfer from Marquette that sat out last season, he could play along with a bench bench of Bingham, Kithier, Lawyer, and Julius Marble. I think that Michigan State team is 16. I will move them up to anywhere from 10 to 12 if Xavier Tillman does come back. That would be a big-time game changer. But a core of Watts, Henry, and Joey Hauser is pretty good, especially when you consider Tom Izzo's track record. We're going to get to a couple other teams in the Big Ten in a little bit, but Michigan State is a team that they're a proven winner, and they're a top 25 team. I have them at number 17. And then at number 16, we'll go to the ACC once again, and I'm going to take the North Carolina Tar Heels. And I think UNC is one of the more interesting teams to break down due to the fact that they're really big. And we all know that typically Roy Williams likes to play a big lineup, but this is big for even his standards. They lose basically every main piece besides Brooks and Baycott from last year's team. Cole Anthony, Brandon Robinson, both gone along with the 2 grad transfers. But so they're going to be starting Caleb Love at the 1, Leaky Black at the 2, and right now, to me, it would look like Armando Baycott at the 3. And that's the big problem for me, is that I like Armando Baycott. He was solid and fine down the stretch last year, but if you're playing him at the 3 with Garrison Brooks at the 4 and Deron Sharp at the 5, that is just a monstrous lineup. And when you're playing a guy at the 2 in Leaky Black, I don't know if you're going to have enough shooting. They have a couple other guards in RJ Davis and Puff Johnson. Johnson is a guy that's a little bigger for the 2. RJ Davis, I don't really know if he's going to be able to step in and play right away. So that's my one concern with this UNC team. I love Garrison Brooks' game, though. I think he's sneaky underrated. Like Deron Sharp and Walker Kessler as well. It's just going to be interesting to see what Roy Williams does to manage and do with his rotation. So I'm going to have UNC at number 16. To recap the list one more time, I have Seton Hall at 25, Rutgers at 24, Richmond at 23, Texas at 22, Alabama at 21, Louisville at 20, Houston at 19, Kansas at 18, Michigan State at 17, UNC at 16. And what that means is at number 15, we'll go to the Pac-12, and I'm going to take the Arizona State Sun Devils. And the thing with ASU is weird because their roster really did go some changes in a good way and a bad way down the stretch of the offseason. I thought when they had Romello White, this could be a team that could win the Pac-12. Unfortunately, they lose him, but they also gain Josh Christopher, the former top 10 recruit. So right now, their top guard, Remy Martin, is 50-50 on the NBA draft. That is one of the more bigger draft decisions to monitor. I think if they bring back Martin, Verge, and Joshua Christopher, that is a super dynamic backcourt. The only problem is, are they going to be able to rebound enough? And without Romello White, that is a big, big problem. They do have some bodies, though. Kamani Lawrence, Tayshaun Sherry, and Jalen Graham were all guys that played a little bit last year. Hopefully, Jalen Graham can make a little bit of a bigger impact. And I actually do think this could be one of the better teams that Bobby Hurley will have since he's gotten to Arizona State. I have the Sun Devils as my number 15 team in the preseason. Coming in at number 14, this is a team that we've also spoken about a decent amount on this show before, and that is the Stanford Cardinal. I said when Zaire Williams committed, this team should be pretty solid, and nothing has changed. Right now, Tyrell Terry is still on the fence about his NBA draft decision, and if he comes back, this Stanford team should be right around 13, and I'm going to predict that he does come back, and that Stanford right now should be at number 14, But right now, when I look at this Cardinal team, Dejon Davis, Tyrell Terry, Zaire Williams, 3 very dynamic guards. You have a very good stretch 4 in Spencer Jones, who could shoot, and a pretty good big in Oscar Da Silva, along with the 2 bench guys, Wills and Dallaire, who produced last year. Big-time season for Jared Hass. I think if Stanford doesn't make the NCAA tournament, he should be fired. No tournaments in 6 years. That is a problem. Moving into the team I have at number 13, we'll head to the SEC, and I'm going to take Rick Barnes and the Tennessee Vols. And I totally understand that this team did not make the NCAA tournament last year. As a matter of fact, compared to preseason expectations, they were pretty disappointing. But when you look at the circumstances, right, and when you look at what exactly happened, this team lost Lamonte Turner midway through the season. He was their starting point guard. Also, Jordan Bowden is out of eligibility. But they do bring back Santiago Vescovi, a kid that stepped in directly from Uruguay. He literally stepped off the plane and was awesome for Tennessee down the stretch. They also bring back Josiah Jordan-James, former top 30 recruit, Jaden Springer, a McDonald's All-American, and then the very dynamic front court of Yves Pons and John Fulkerson, along with E.J. Onosik, the grad transfer from Sacred Heart, and Keon Johnson, another really good freshman. So I love this Tennessee team. I think they're going to be at the top of the SEC competing. Rick Barnes is a god, one of the more underrated coaches in all of college basketball. I have Tennessee at number 13. Moving on to the team I have at number 12, and we will head to the Pac-12, and this is the team that I actually have in the preseason at least winning the Pac-12, and that would be Mick Cronin and his UCLA Bruins. And a lot of people are going to say, Zach, how could you have UCLA this high? They just lost Daishawn Nix, a guy that a lot of people thought could have been the best point guard in this class. Well, I'll tell you what, not that that doesn't matter. I think Daishawn Nix is a solid player, but UCLA actually brings back basically every key contributor for their team last year, and that includes freshman point guard Tiger Campbell, who was awesome down the stretch last year. Pair him with Jaime Jaquez. Any UCLA fan will tell you how great he was down the stretch for the Bruins last year. They also will be bringing back Cody Riley and Jalen Hill, the two very productive big men. Also, Chris Smith, right now, he is another guy that is 50-50 on the NBA draft scale. I'm going to predict that he comes back. If he does, and UCLA could be as good as I expect them to be, I think he could be a first-round pick. And I trust Mick Cronin. What he did last year was unbelievable. I think the Bruins right now should be favored over Stanford and over Arizona State in the Pac-12. I think they're the more balanced team. I think they're the better coach team. I have UCLA at number 12. At number 11, we will head to the Big Ten once again, and I'm going to give some respect to Greg Gard and the Wisconsin Badgers. I'm going to have them at number 11. They're another team that brings back a bunch of key pieces from the previous year. Brad Davison, Demetric Trice, Aleem Ford, and most importantly, my guy Nate Roivers. He was awesome down the stretch for Wisco last year. I think he's good enough to be the best player on a good team. Micah Potter should hopefully get a little more minutes. He now is going to have a system under his belt, a season under his belt in the Wisconsin system. Greg Gard really proved me wrong last year. I had my doubts on him going into last season, but he deserves a lot of credit for the job he did in Madison. I have the Badgers at number 11. Moving into the top 10, we'll go to the Big East, and I'm going to take Creighton. And I will say this. If Tyshawn Alexander would have came back to Creighton, I would have Creighton in the top 5. This is the second year in a row, last year with Martin Krompel, this year with Tyshawn Alexander, where Creighton just gets burned by an NBA draft decision. But what I will say is this, they're still going to be pretty good. Marcus Zagorowski right now is my preseason prediction for Big East Player of the Year. He's a baller. Denzel Mahoney played well down the stretch last year. Ballack is a guy that has been there a while. Damian Jefferson is a guy that's been there a couple of years. Kristen Bishop was your perfect modern-day center last year. You also have Sharif Mitchell and the returning Jacob Epperson coming off the bench, as well as top 100 recruit Ryan Kalkbrenner. I think Seton Hall is going to be solid, but Creighton is better. I do have one more Big East team in this top 10 that's not named Creighton. I think Creighton should be a top 10 team, and that is even without Tyshawn Alexander. The other thing I want to say about Creighton is last year, they did a really nice job winning away from home, and historically, during Greg McDermott's time in Omaha, that has been something that they've kind of struggled with. And last year, they went into Seton Hall and won. They went into Villanova and won, and they do deserve a lot of credit for that. So I'm going to have Creighton at number 10. At number 9 in my preseason top 10, we will go back to the Big 12. And I love the Big 12, by the way. I think the Big 12 next season is looking like one of the one or two best leagues in all of college basketball. But anyways, team I have at number 9, West Virginia. And I totally understand that last year West Virginia really faded down the stretch. But I'll tell you what. People forget what West Virginia's preseason expectations were. And it would be a successful season if they even made the NCAA tournament. And even though WVU really did fall off, they still would have been an NCAA tournament team. And they bring back basically every key contributor. Oscar Tshiebwe right now is 50-50 on the NBA draft, but it is looking like he should hopefully be coming back. They also bring back Derek Culver to play with him in the front court. Miles McBride was their best offensive player down the stretch last year. If he could take another big-time step, I think he will end up being the leading scorer from this West Virginia team, along with Emmett Matthews Jr., a guy they really like. And I just think they're very dynamic. This is one of the more dynamic teams Bob Huggins has had since he's gotten to Morgantown. And I'm going to tell you what, this is probably going to be Bob Huggins' best chance to get to the Final Four since the Javon Carter years, maybe his sophomore or junior year. I actually really like this West Virginia team. I think they're being undervalued right now by most. And I think a core of Tshiebwe, Culver, and McBride is good enough to win you a lot of games with Bob Huggins as the coach. They also have a nice bench. I have West Virginia at number 9. At number 8, we will head to the ACC, and I'm going to take the Virginia Cavaliers. And I love this Virginia team. Obviously, Tony Bennett is a proven winner, and especially towards the back end of last season, Tony Bennett did an awesome job with this Virginia team. At the beginning of last season, if you remember, Virginia was really struggling. They were having a really tough time scoring the ball, and I really didn't know what to think of them. But down the stretch, Kie Clark, Tomas Walton Tenzai, and Jay Huff, those 3 guys in particular, really stepped up and led Virginia to a top 4 ACC finish. Unfortunately, they do lose Mamadi Diakite, who probably was their most consistent scorer, but they do bring in Sam Hauser, the grad transfer from Marquette, and Casey Morcell gets an extra year of experience, and Jabri Abdur-Rahim is brought in, the top 30 recruit. I think with all that talent, combined with Tony Bennett's coaching expertise, I'm going to have Virginia as my number 8 team in my preseason top 25. Tony Bennett is a proven winner. Obviously, they have the talent. I just think they're going to need to find that star player. But with Kihei Clark, his specialty is, and he's at his best when he's the 3rd or 4th best player on your team. That's exactly what he is here. I have Virginia at number 8. At number 7, we will go to the SEC, and I'm going to take Kentucky. And this is assuming that the grad transfer they just got, Olivier Sarr, is eligible right away. I think you pair him with B.J. Boston and Terrence Clark, 2 of the better freshmen in this class, then Kentucky is right there. Hopefully, Keon Brooks could take a little bit more of a step. Same with Davion Mintz, same with Isaiah Jackson and Devin Ashkew. I think if you get something from those guys, that's when this Kentucky team is really good. And my expectations for this Kentucky team is that guys like Brooks and Jackson and Ashkew, those guys are going to take their hiccups in the beginning of the season, but that's okay because that's what John Calipari does. He makes sure that his freshmen are, get exposed and get experience by March, and I think that's exactly what's going to happen with this Kentucky team. Is this Kentucky team very young? Yes, but I don't think that means they won't be good, and I think by March they will be all good. I have Kentucky at number 7. At number 6, and this is assuming that Luka Garza does come back to school, I'm going to have the Iowa Hawkeyes. Obviously, this team is going to need to learn how to play some defense, but I will say this. Offensively, Bohannon, Frederick, Wieskamp, Connor McCaffrey, Garza, along with Joe Toussaint, Jack Nungy, and Pat McCaffrey off the bench is a really, really good offensive lineup. Iowa, since McCaffrey has been there, has obviously had a really tough time playing defense, but I would have been curious to see what exactly this team would have done if the tournament would have happened. I think if Garza does come back, it will be Fran McCaffrey's best shot at making a Final Four since he got the Iowa job. And I think this could be Iowa's first time being the preseason favorite in the Big Ten since Fran McCaffrey has gotten that job. I think Iowa's in a pretty solid spot. They are going to need a big season, especially if they have the preseason National Player of the Year coming back, and that would be Luka Garza if he does. Moving on to the team I have at number 5, we will head back to the Big 12 and give me Chris Beard and his Texas Tech Red Raiders. Unfortunately, they do lose some pieces, and they weren't great last year, but Davide Moretti, Kyler Edwards, 2 guys that have played in a national championship game and have experience. Namari Burnett, top 10 recruit, baller. Terrence Shannon Jr., a guy that was up and down this past season, but I think he eventually is going to be an NBA player, super athletic. And then at the 5, Marcos Santos Silva, the transfer they bring in from VCU, he could really play. You combine those guys with Micah Peavy, Joel Ntwabwe, Kevin McCullough off the bench. McCullough was awesome down the stretch for the Red Raiders last season. You combine all that talent with Chris Beard's moxie of him as a coach. I'm going to trust this Texas Tech Red Raider team all the way, especially in a tough Big 12. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, though, because last year, I really don't believe Texas Tech was that great. I think they were a little disappointing, as a matter of fact. But they did lose an NBA player in Jared Culver. And also with this team, the interesting to monitor, and the guy I haven't even brought up yet, is Jamias Ramsey. Right now, I'm going to guess that he does leave for the NBA, but it is kind of 50-50. And I'll tell you what, I think if Texas Tech does get him back, I'm going to move them even up higher on this list. Right now, I have them at number 5. They could even move up to number 3. At number 4, I'm going to have Duke, and I totally understand that they're very young, and they have a freshman point guard, which is always a big-time risk, but the talent on this team is undeniable. And the reason why I usually like some Duke teams, right, is when they combine experience and talent. Over the past couple seasons, they haven't necessarily done that. I liked Trey Jones, and he was fine, but I don't know, last year with Duke, they were never really there for me, and I was never really on the bandwagon. But with this team and their depth, I am. Jeremy Roach, Wendell Moore, a guy that returns. Jalen Johnson, top 10 recruit. Matthew Hurt, a former top 10 recruit that returns to school. Mark Williams, top McDonald's All-American recruit. They also bring in DJ Stewart and Jamin Brakefield, along with veterans Jordan Goldwire and Joey Baker. I'm a little higher on this Duke team than most. I think they're really good. I think Coach K hasn't won an ACC regular season tournament or an ACC regular season championship since 2010. That's a big issue. I think Duke is their year. I think Duke right now is the fourth best team in the preseason top 25. At number 3, I'm going to have Villanova, and this is assuming they lose Sadiq Bey. He right now is on track to go to the NBA. And the other question for Villanova is Brian Antoine. Last year, he didn't really play much, but he is a former top recruit. I love that they bring back the veteran backcourt of Gillespie and Justin Moore, along with the veteran frontcourt of Samuels and Robinson Earl. We know what happens a lot of times when this kind of Villanova team has all this experience. I never like to bet against Jay Wright. I have Villanova at number 3. At number 2, I have the team that I think I would have picked to win the national championship if there was an NCAA tournament in 2020, and that is Scott Drew and the Baylor Bears. Unfortunately, they do lose Freddie Gillespie, who was one of my favorite players in all of college basketball. I'm not even kidding. But if Jared Butler does come back and he's 50-50 on the NBA right now, I'm going to have them at number 2, and I think they deserve to be at number 2. Butler, Maceo Teague, the former transfer who was awesome down the stretch. Davion Mitchell and Mark Vital and Tristan Clark. Clark is really the big question for me. He's going to have to replace a lot of Freddie Gillespie's minutes. And unfortunately, even though he was very good 2 years ago, last year he just never really looked like himself. I like Matthew Meyer as a guy that could possibly break out. Scott Drew, one of the more underrated coaches in all of college basketball. I have Baylor at number 2. And then at number 1, I'm going to take Gonzaga. And this is assuming that all of their dogs do come back. Ayayi, Kispert, and Petrusev right now are all in consideration for leaving early for the NBA draft. It's going to be interesting to see what exactly they do. But Ayayi and Jalen Suggs, the top 5 recruit, could all really play. They have plenty of depth with Timmy Watson, Dominic Harris, and Julian Strather, 2 top 100 recruits as well. I love Mark Few, man. He's one of the more underrated coaches in all of college basketball, and the run Gonzaga has been on over the last couple of years has been nothing short of sensational. This team is just loaded if they were to play and get everyone back. I like Aaron Cook, the transfer they got from the Missouri Valley. He was a very good and effective offensive player down the stretch last season. I have Gonzaga with Suggs, Ayayi, Aaron Cook, Corey Kispert, Phil Petrusev, and Mark Few all there as my preseason number 1 team. So just to recap once again, I have Gonzaga at 1, Baylor at 2, Villanova at 3, Duke at 4, Texas Tech at 5, Iowa at 6, Kentucky at 7, Virginia at 8, West Virginia at 9, Creighton at 10, Wisconsin at 11, UCLA at 12, Tennessee at 13, Stanford at 14, Arizona State at 15, Roy Williams at 16, Arizona State, at 15, North Carolina at 16, Michigan State at 17, Kansas at 18, Houston at 19, Louisville at 20, Alabama at 21, Texas at 22, Richmond at 23, Rutgers at 24, and Seton Hall at 25.